With our top focus on Hong Kong and China, in a so-called push for patriotism, China has now passed a controversial resolution on Hong Kong's election law that will further cripple Hong Kong's autonomy. The changes have been made in a guise to reform Hong Kong's electoral system, and now China has granted itself veto powers over all election candidates in Hong Kong, with a major implication being near complete eradication of a level playing field, including pro-democracy candidates. After months of pro-democracy rallies shook Hong Kong in all of 2019 and 2020, China has been quick to fix the fatal flaw that was sure to undermine its hold over Hong Kong. The National People's Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor of the decision that will now empower its standing committee to draft the amendments to Annex 1 and 2 of Hong Kong's basic law, its mini constitution. There were no opposing votes except one abstention. For more details, let's quickly go across to our correspondent Richard Kimber, who's joining us live from Hong Kong at this hour. Richard, once drafted, what will it mean for Hong Kong, especially the LECO and the pro-democracy opposition groups?
Well, this is very significant for Hong Kong politics. What it basically means is the eradication, ultimately, of any strong, organised form of political opposition. The National People's Congress has given the power to the executive committee in Hong Kong that chooses the chief executive in the city to not only choose the chief executive, but also to have a veto power over every single prospective legislator that sits in the Legislative Council here, effectively Hong Kong's Parliament building. It also will have the power to directly appoint what is now being described as a large number of those lawmakers. So the committee, effectively a pro-Beijing organisation that picks the chief executive, the top political person in Hong Kong, now has the ability to also pick many of the lawmakers that sit in the Hong Kong Political Assembly and to effectively have the veto power over those that it does not directly elect itself.
Right. Richard, be it detentions or arrests, since the national security law was enacted in June last year, how has Beijing tightened its grip over Hong Kong?
Well, in simple terms, what has effectively happened is the large-scale political activism that we saw a couple of years ago that resulted in some millions of people taken to the streets has all but disappeared. Many of the most high-profile individuals who are leading the charge with that activism have now been arrested or have indeed left Hong Kong for fear of being arrested. One of them just arrived in Australia a couple of days ago. This is symptomatic, really, of what's changed here in the last 18 months. We've gone from a situation where there was a large degree of freedom of expression and freedom to criticise the government. It was taking place on the street loudly and proudly, and that's effectively all disappeared. And the democracy activists who are still campaigning are really looking to alternative means to voice their frustration. They're lobbying overseas governments instead of lobbying here in Hong Kong. They're calling for international support instead of even expecting it's possible to have more homegrown support because of the inability to express their views. So it's really a dramatic shift. There are, though, and it's important to express, some proportions of the Hong Kong society that are welcoming all of these changes. They see this as a route to stability and specifically a route to economic prosperity again for the city, because after 12 months of coronavirus pandemic, many people in the business community here are just desperate to start making money again, and if it comes at the cost of political freedom, some of them don't really mind.
Right. It's interesting, Richard, that you mentioned international support. Having said that, now even though the US State Department disapproved China's move just a few days ago in a sharp reaction and has supported the people of Hong Kong, but is there any scope for diplomacy left between Washington and Beijing when it comes to Hong Kong?
Well, it's very difficult to see what more the international world can do. There's very strong rhetoric from the US, from the UK and from the European Union, and indeed from the BRICS allies, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand. All of these countries have quickly criticised Beijing each and every time that it's instituted new strong measures with regards to changing the political system in Hong Kong. Just an hour ago, the UK Foreign Secretary, already barely an hour after the actual bill was passed itself in Beijing, is already condemning this. But the crucial thing is Beijing is not really taking any notice, and despite some sanctions that have been placed on specific high-level individuals in Hong Kong and China, despite threats of political action, there's no real indication from Hong Kong government nor from Beijing that this will in any way derail the progress that Beijing is making towards effectively having a stronger control over the city. And that's what's concerning for democracy activists. I think there was a point in time, perhaps a year ago, when there was an expectation that more international pressure might result in some level of change. But that expectation is pretty much dried up now, and it's really difficult to see what more the international community might be willing to do to try to put pressure on Beijing over this issue.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and watch how the international community chooses to react to today's developments. Thank you so much, Richard Kimber, for bringing in those inputs.